Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 177 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Criminologist podcast, where we bring you unparalleled insights into the world of crime, justice, and forensic science. I'm your host, Joseph Arvidsson, and today we have a guest whose journey into criminology is both deeply personal and profoundly impactful. Jackie Dunn isn't just an expert working at the intersection of data, social justice, and public policy in her role at Data for Change. She is also a mother whose life was forever altered when her son became incarcerated in a Florida prison. Thrown into a system she had to navigate as both a professional and a parent, Jackie has emerged as a powerful advocate for change and reform in the criminal justice system. In today's episode, we explore a range of compelling questions that are close to Jackie's heart, such as, what are the considerations when using data in criminal justice analysis and reform efforts? How does the personal experience of having a loved one in prison shape one's perspective on the system? How does Data for Change, her company, aim to bring social justice elements into criminology, and a variety of other relevant and timely topics? Jackie's insights are a unique blend of professional expertise and maternal instincts, offering a rich, multifaceted view on how the criminal justice system impacts individuals and families. As we delve into ethical considerations of data use and the much-needed reforms to create a more equitable system, Jackie brings a perspective that is both intensely personal and deeply rooted in a desire for social justice. Join us today for this deeply moving and informative episode. It promises to be a thought-provoking discussion that broadens our understanding of crime, justice, and the complexities of advocacy for reform. So please, enjoy my conversation with Jackie Dunn, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for joining us today on the Criminologist podcast. Why don't we start off by you just sharing what pivotal moment or experience sparked your interest and dedication to advocating for criminal justice reform, especially with a focus on data-driven solutions?
Well, thanks for having me, Joe. It's an honor to be with you today. I'm a 25-year veteran of data analytics, and my love of data is strong. I have passion there, but I love people as well, so that kind of mixes well with what I've done over the past 25 years. Never had any exposure to criminal justice in any way, shape, or form in my life. By the grace of God, wasn't a victim, wasn't an offender, didn't have any family members. I mean, literally nothing in the world of criminal justice in my experiences. And in November of 2020, my 20-year-old son, Luke, got behind the wheel, intoxicated, and drove 2.5 hours down the highway, hit a vehicle, and killed a man. Very good man, a husband, father, soldier, just horrific day, 20 years of good behavior and one bad day, and we went from 0 to 60 real quick. I considered myself kind of feeding from a fire hose for about about a year straight. I'm a knowledge junkie by trade, so just constantly, just trying to learn from that moment forward. Where are we at? What are we facing? What's going to happen? As a conservative Republican woman, criminal justice is nothing like what I thought it was, what I assumed it was. And boy, real quickly, I realized that we got a 1,000-layer onion of not good things, and every layer gets worse than the prior. So that's how I got into it. I'm using my data knowledge now to bring facts and kind of squash assumptions that aren't necessarily accurate, that we've had to rely on for lots and lots of years. So I don't fault like some of the things that were done back in the day, because all they had to go by is what their gut instinct was. And as we know, that's just not always the case. And data is the kind of new to the party in the ability to truly, I think, change minds and kind of really understand where the issues are and what some of the possible solutions might be.
I love that approach, and I'm a data junkie as well. My fellow evidence-based practice trainers and I, that's sort of our foundation is just follow the data. And to your point, Jackie, it's challenging in criminal justice because of the seriousness of offenses and people's real life experiences. It's not like we're looking at dry business analytics or something like that. We have to realize there's people's lives behind this data. But that being said, it also doesn't mean that we really shouldn't lean into that data and not make decisions based on hyperbole or emotion. Or it's kind of like when, speak of the devil, ironically, for example, when we train cognitive behavioral interventions, we always tell the practitioner, hey, listen, you've got to calm your client down. If they're back in that amygdala alligator brain, none of this is going to take hold.
Right.
But again, the same with data. We can't just go by high-profile cases to make decisions that are going to affect scores of people, because those outliers don't represent the norm, and you shouldn't make decisions based on those high-profile outlier horrendous crimes. What are some other things that I'm preaching to the choir here, that you've come across in your journey leveraging data to make your arguments?
Yeah, I mean, so just like you just said, I mean, outliers is an important concept to keep in mind, because I've had numerous discussions with my county sheriff, who's also the president of the Florida Sheriff's Association, Bill Leeper. He's amazing. I love this man. He's been so supportive of me and just willing to listen to what I have to say and give me, honest feedback from a law enforcement perspective. Because at the end of the day, what we all want is public safety. No one doesn't want to be safe. No one wants a law enforcement officer to ever be in jeopardy for any reason. In fact, I was just in a legislative delegation meeting the other day, and the police chief of the city spoke about, we need to lock them up because my guys are getting hurt. And he was passionate about it. I don't blame him, because he's watching his officers' lives be at risk, and too many incidents lately happening that were either, hurting them terribly or potentially killing them. And so I had to speak after that. And so I'm, coming at it from an opposite angle, but I'm like, God, you're so right. We are broken, but we already lock them all up. I mean, Florida's got the third largest prison population. We have 25% of the entire United States life without parole population. So we're already doing that, and it's not working. And so it fed perfectly. Like, I just kind of let it flow. I didn't even read my 3-minute speech. Just said, listen, you're right, but we're broken. We've got to fix those issues. So while my personal preference is that we get to the point where we can truly earn a second chance, right? So like my son would be able to earn an opportunity to get out earlier. He got a 19-year sentence for a first-time offender, DUI manslaughter, at the age of 20. Like I said, never been in trouble before. I mean, obviously this is very serious. He deserves consequences, But we're not going to benefit anybody by him being in prison for 20 years. It's not going to make anybody safer. It's not going to make anybody, at the end of the day, it's not going to make any hearts mend for him to sit in there. And he's, I used to sell real estate. The highest and best use of his time is not sitting in prison for 20 years. It's to come out and talk to kids about what he did. And that's not tomorrow, not the next time. And we offered a 10-year, our initial plea offer to the prosecutor was a 10-year prison sentence, a substantial, restitution to the family especially for the two boys that lost their father, and then a lifetime of getting in front of kids and young adults. So it's not like we didn't take it seriously. I mean, Luke even was like, I know, just don't even come get me when we finally figured out where he was, because he was nowhere near where we live. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Well, I mean, I at the time, I thought that, I don't know what I thought, but I didn't think he was going to be in prison for 20 years. And in Florida, there are no second chances. We don't have second chances. We don't have parole. And we have truth in sentencing, which was brought forth in 95. And so they can only earn 15% off their sentence. Whereas there are 16 states in the United States that don't have parole. Many of them have, you can earn 50% off your sentence, or, you can do different things in lieu of parole that are still second chance worthy, And in Florida, the 15% you can earn, you get 10 days a month as long as you just behave. You don't have to do anything. You just have to lay low. You don't have to educate yourself. You don't have to deal with whatever brought you in here in the first place. You literally can lay on your bunk all day long when you're not at work, and you get your 10 days. And by the way, you hit that as long as you're good the whole way through and don't get a DR. There's many times DRs happen, disciplinary records, because it's just a power hungry correctional officer. But, neither here nor there. If you get any kind of DR, you can lose time off you can lose some of your time and what have you. But just in a perfect world, say you never lose, you get your 10 days a month. Well, Luke will hit his 15% max in year 8 and still have, and I've actually done, this is nerdy, I know, I have a game time calculator spreadsheet that tells me exactly how many days left of incarceration someone has where they can't earn any more time. And he's got 2,695 days of what I call hopeless incarceration. And so while he'll be good, I mean, obviously that's not what we want, but he's very faith-based, and, he'll continue to mentor people in there and do good and be, show others a positive way to take your days, but most of the guys in there, they need that push. They need that incentive. They're not going to just go get their GED because, they're young and still stupid, they're not going to do any of the things that they later on in life might look back and say, oh, I should have taken advantage of these opportunities. So we don't have second chances in regards to sentencing, which is, my biggest, beef, but we also don't have second chances in regards to programming when they're in there and reentry, so we have barriers all over the place that truly make it almost impossible for someone to come out better than they went in. And so hence the problem we see in society today. So, they all feed off each other too, right? So if you have the incentive to earn time off your sentence, you're going to go and aggressively take the education, the TIDES program, whatever those things might be that you hope that you have in your institution, and you aggressively prepare yourself for society. Because everything you do is you get rewarded by some amount of time off your sentence, and you should be able to earn. To me, as long as you're earning and you're doing the things that you're supposed to do, you should be able to earn time off your sentence. The whole way through. You shouldn't hit a point where it's like these guys, they literally know how much time they can earn, and they're like, well, I can screw off for the first 10 years because I can't. I know what I can get anyway. So and even the head of the FTC programming for the entire state, it's so frustrating because I go in these prisons and they're all just lying on their beds, on their tablets. I mean, they're not misbehaving, but they're not bettering themselves, I'm
going to steal that quote from you, Jackie. Aggressively prepare yourself for society.
Yeah.
And to your point, not just warehouse,
Yeah, we are truly warehousing them right now. And then, so to compound it from another angle, so sadly, statistically, 83% of our 86,000 men and women that are incarcerated today, 83% are not actively in any kind of programming. I mean, and some of it's because, a lot of it's because of choice. They just choose not to do it. But we also have a 30% vacancy issue in the correctional officer staff. So they don't have the bandwidth to do a lot of the programming. So someone like my son, he can't go get his college degree because you have to have 10 years or less. He can't go to the dog program. He can't do any of the good programs that they do have because there's only so many spots. And the guys, rightly so, the guys getting out sooner get the priority on those spots. So he luckily got in with the chaplain, and now he's his aide, and he loves his job, and he's in the faith-based program, and those kind of things. But they hit roadblocks unintentionally too. So there's roadblocks from all angles. And not enough opportunity to learn, even if you want to. It's just a shame because 44% of people that leave prison in Florida, 44% don't have their GED still. I mean, how do we let them out without a GED? I mean, you're not only are you already you're a convicted felon, so you already have huge hurdles to survive in society because of that, but now you also don't have even your high school education. I mean, it's just we got, I think, 1,400 people in the Florida prison system last year got their GED. Because they do track it because they get measured on it because but to me, that's a problem. There's no incentive to want to get it.
That's unimaginable to me. I can barely say the words. I'm so worked up about that 44% figure. That is insane.
It's just sick. It makes you sick to your stomach. And you wonder why these guys go out, come back in, go out, come back in, go out, come back in. And you just cross your fingers that when they go out and come back in, it's not for something that killed or hurt a police officer or, it's just so sickening. And then, that's just one side of a very multifaceted issue, pile of issues.
Jackie, Florida's been a focal point in discussion about criminal justice issues as of late. Could you maybe highlight the key challenges facing the criminal justice system in the Sunshine State and why you believe they stand out maybe vis-a-vis some other parts of the country?
Yeah, I would say one thing we kind of mentioned earlier, these outliers. So, discretion comes into play in every case, which it should. We should never have a blanket punishment for everybody's different. Every crime is different. Every situation is different. Everyone's background is different. And so it's important to allow discretion at the prosecutorial level. I don't discount that at all, but there's times where discretion goes awry or you get heavy-handed a sentence that doesn't match up with what statistics show other people in other counties, like bigger counties, for instance, or there's various reasons why someone can get a big sentence compared to someone else that was a very similar background, and I've done tons of research on it, especially obviously with DUI manslaughter. And so I don't disagree with discretion, but again, because there's no second chances, like the fact that my son got pretty much twice as much time in prison, the prison part of it, than, a lot of people that had DUIs before their DUI manslaughter. I mean, lots of different scenarios that were way worse, but they were in bigger counties, whatever, different families, different victims, input or whatever. So, so he's in for twice as much time as, like, say, this other guy, which I'm like, you got yourself into this, so you can get yourself out of it, but he can't. You can't earn back that 10 extra years that you got that someone else didn't get. So discretion is a big one, and not having any recourse for that discretion, whether it be right when it happens or 5 years later and you bring that guy back in and you say, what have you done to deserve me to relook at this case? Which of course they already have a huge caseload. So I'm sure none of them want to do that, but prosecutorial innovation and prosecutorial reviews are two criminal justice reform topics that have come into play in other states where like a prosecutor can choose to revisit a case that maybe they looked at, that they, maybe they're thinking later and, that things changed or whatever. So that's one discretion, just the lack of any way to right the wrong or right the ship, and I mean the onus is on the person who did it. It's not like he should just automatically get another. I mean, like, I don't care that he got a much bigger sentence than someone else, as long as he can earn his way out of it. You know what I mean? So that's one. And of course that's near and dear to my heart. But the other one is obviously our life without parole population, having 25% of the nation. I mean, like, I think we have over 14,000 in our prisons that are life without parole, which of course any life sentence is life without parole in Florida because we don't have parole. So we have, from what I read somewhere, and I haven't been able to, I have not verified this fact, but that we have more than 30 other states combined. Because I do know that the closest one to us has 8%. So we've got 25%, and so anyway, a lot of this comes from this prison releasee reoffender PRR that we have in place in Florida, which the real hardcore, tough on crime people love. And it's a 2 strikes law. So basically, if you leave prison, and again, this is obviously not working because we're still getting law enforcement getting shot at and stuff. So, but you leave prison, and within 3 years, which is the normal the recidivization or whatever you want to, I can't say it, measures, within 3 years, if you go back to prison, you've considered recidivized. So if you have another felony within 3 years, and it's a subset list, but it's a pretty big list, the prosecutor can choose to classify you a PRR offender, which means a habitual offender, after two things. And, they can be both burglaries. It doesn't have to, I mean, there's a victim of every crime, but I mean, they do not have to be crimes that there was a physically hurt individual or whatever for that crime. And so once the prosecutor chooses to classify as PRR, which a couple that I've asked said pretty much every time that comes into play, they do it. It's not like they choose to only use it sparingly. It's used regularly. When they classify someone as PRR, that person immediately has to get automatically the statutory maximum for that charge. And the judge can't even overrule it. The judge can't even say, no, this guy, these circumstances. So for instance, and I use this example in my other podcast, but it's just near and dear to my heart. Stephen Stuckey is a man he got a 30-year sentence basically for stealing 6 DVDs from Sam's Club. He'd been in before, and I actually asked his wife about it after the last podcast to make sure I got the facts right. He had been in before, stole, it was like $97 worth of DVDs from Sam's Club. An overzealous, on-site security officer that was actually a police officer that was, on, suspension or whatever. And so anyway, he had a seizure during the arrest. They actually took him straight to the hospital, but they charged him with resisting arrest. So then that stepped up the charges. And then at the end of the day, he's serving 30 years in prison for stealing 6 DVDs because of this PRR. And that's why, and he's not got a life sentence per se, but it's pretty much a life sentence, There's thousands. There's actually PRR groups that are so, they're just heartbroken because there's thousands of people in prison that either, didn't hurt anybody physically, but they're in for life. And many of them were under the age of 25 when it happened. So not only are they young and potentially, most of those guys age out of crime just naturally, but, how do you determine that someone's life is not worthy of any rehabilitation or restoration for something like a burglary? I couldn't even believe it when I read it. And then some of the really hardcore tough on crime, which I think smart on crime and tough on crime are 2 very, very different topics. They just think it's like the best thing ever happened. And I'm like, do you believe in God? I just don't understand how you can even how anybody can be behind that. Obviously there's people that are not rehabilitatable and should be in prison for the rest of their life because we're actually scared of them. But like I have a quote by Pat Nolan from the Nolan Center, we have people in prison just because we're mad at them. And that is not what prison is meant for.
You read my mind. That's an off-cited quote as of late, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it's the same thing. We need to lock people up because we're afraid of them, not because we're mad at them.
Yeah.
Right. Remind me and my listeners, Jackie, I'm sorry, but if I forget to ask, what does PRR stand for?
Prison Releasee Reoffender.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. Two strikes law. It's called the two strikes law.
Because they learned so much from the three strikes law in California, which literally bankrupted that state. But yeah.
Exactly. And so here we sit with the proud, the proud honor of 25% of the entire nation's life without parole population. It makes me sick to think about it.
I suspect a lot of this comes from the fact that decision makers base decisions on what they see at the 6 o'clock news, or they watch The Sopranos or Sons of Anarchy, and they don't talk to people like you or I,
No.
Jackie. You've mentioned sort of the negative impact of this mainstream media lens in looking at their perceptions and how the criminal justice system functions. Could you maybe talk more about that and your thoughts on how you feel the media has shaped or exacerbated the problems with criminal justice and or particular criminal justice reform efforts?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, obviously they only want to talk about the really grandiose, sexy stories. So like my son's case was all over the news, which, whatever, I get it. Obviously we hear tons and tons about Chicago and New York and even those cities. I bet you go in there and I bet it's nowhere near as bad as they tout it to be. You know what I mean? Like, I don't discount, and I'm not a soft on crime girl at all. I'm a smart on crime girl. I really do not believe in like just letting everybody out. And, I again, it's not black and white. Right. So, I always say that those of us that are now fighting for this and advocating for criminal justice reform, we're terrible PR. We're terrible PR for ourselves because it's just not talked about. Right. So the news doesn't talk about the current state. They don't, and so no one talks about, most people are just not even educated on it. And like I wasn't, like, I think about myself prior to this and I'm like, what did I ever know about any of this on the news? And I'm like, I just felt, okay, I'm safe. And, so I can just live in my bubble and not worry about it, because the only things that hit the news are the ones that will catch somebody's attention. It's not necessarily any kind of reality of what the true state of the system is like. And that's why I've started, educating. I have this Criminal Justice 101 webinar that I do. I'll do it for anybody, online, in person, anywhere in the state. Anybody that will have me, I'll talk about this to anybody that will listen. And it's to educate Florida residents on the current state of criminal justice. It has nothing to do with reform. It has nothing to do with politics. It's literally just fact-based. Here's the current state. You take that information and you take it home and you figure out what that means to you and if you're bothered by it, and you darn well better be, but that's up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to think. And then your action item is go tell your legislator that you demand something better. You demand fiduciary, protection of your tax money. And it's okay to be involved in criminal justice reform bills. They're scared to do it. There's many Republican legislators that are on board with us. It's just, they're scared to take that step or we also know that our governor's going to veto it if we take it there. So.
Well, and that's the conundrum, I think, all over the country. You're right. No politician's going to run on the platform of, I'm going to be soft on crime.
Right.
Or they wouldn't literally say that, but that's how it would be interpreted as.
Even across the aisle, both sides of the aisle, it's easy to vote against a reform bill because, it's not just Republicans. It's a bipartisan, thought process. This isn't just one side or the other. It's literally everybody is one area that they feel like they can be tough on, as long as they don't have any personal experience with it. It's an easy thing. It's an easy decision to make.
But I think that's full circle back to your zeal for using analytics to make your point. That transparency is needed. The fact that, as you were saying, so many people are locked up in Florida, life without parole, or even nationally when we look at, for example, I don't know if it's 90%, maybe even 95% of everybody who's incarcerated in a prison cell today will eventually get out.
95, it's 95% nationwide and only 90% in Florida, since we have so many lifers. Seriously. But nationwide, it's 95%. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. 95%. Just if the stakeholders, if the public, if the taxpayers knew that. We were talking a little bit before we went live about some of our other experiences. And I was mentioning the sort of Norwegian prison philosophy, or that of dynamic security. But one of their mantras over there is reminding their correctional officers, their staff members, and I'm thinking of the 95% statistic, is these people are your future neighbors. If you just approach your job through that mindset of, this isn't somebody in a cell block, this isn't the problem child on your wing, this is your future neighbor. How would you want your future neighbor treated? Or, to the larger point, ask the taxpayers, the public, when 95% of these people are going to get out, how do you want them treated? Do you want them less likely to reoffend when they get out, or more likely? Because sadly, the way we operate a lot of prisons, most, prisons are risk factor in and of itself. Yeah. You mentioned your son's, downtime, and the fact that so many people in Florida are getting out without a GED. But they are being exposed to a lot of risk factors, I would contend, that are making them more risky to get out by simply the fact that we're warehousing them.
Absolutely. There's a lot of trouble they can get into when they're bored. But yeah, like in Florida, 45,000 will get out in the next 5 years. I mean, so they're coming out, and they should, and we need to prepare them for that, both while they're still in there and then when they get out into reentry, which is a whole nother, ball game. But so I mean, they're coming out, and we've got to understand that and accept it. And, and guess what? The ones that are prepared to come out are better neighbors than you could ever ask for, because they are so appreciative of every day outside the barbed wire that they will never, they just love life to the fullest, And so if we do prepare them right, we can get there. Like, we can make productive citizens. Most of these people have had horrible upbringings, and just things that they didn't even ask for, that started them down this path, or just that emerging adulthood, 18 to 25, when they're not adults yet, especially males. And they just, especially if they grew up in a rough neighborhood, they're thugging out and, excuse my white girl language here, but, thugging out at, 18, trying to make their name. They're the only way that they feel like they can build confidence is by being more violent than the guy next to them, and then they eventually end up in prison, and you can age them out of that, or give them a mentor, or someone that you don't want to be like me. And you can bring them along. You have to push them a lot of times, and that's where the incentives come in. You got to push them along, but they eventually kind of get that aha moment and are like, okay, I see where now I'm building confidence, because I actually have knowledge about things, and I can ask intelligent questions in a classroom setting. I can be confident in myself, other ways instead of just how tough I am. And, and that's the coup de grace of rehabilitation right there.
What a great synopsis, Jackie, of, again, what most people don't understand, and you just eloquently articulated it. Everybody has a story.
Yep.
Everybody has a story. I often tell this tale of, you could look at every one of those inmates getting out of custody in Florida and trace their story back to every one of those kids was in a kindergarten class one day next to you and next to me, and they didn't raise their hand and say, when I want to grow up, I want to be an inmate in the Florida Department of Corrections. But something happened to their pathway. Something altered their trajectory, which resulted in these criminal behaviors. And you mentioned our TIDES model earlier, which I know we've been talking about it on the show. It's our trauma-informed desistance model. But one of the things we bring to that model is that philosophy of we need to stop looking at folks through an us-them lens and not looking at their criminal behaviors as, again, not to forgive them, but to reframe them more as survival reactions. I say trauma reactions. Sometimes people think that's too hug a thug. So I just reframe it as, okay, fine. Think of it as a survival reaction. They're acting out because they didn't get the safety and security at home that you or I did. They lack significant attachment, and folks can go down the attachment theory rabbit hole. But there's an explanation for these behaviors, and it's really, really, really hard when those behaviors are heinous and whatnot. But if we really want to sort of, put our big boy pants on and solve this problem, we have to be able to separate the offense and look at this objectively and think of those future victims. You mentioned in your talks with sheriff's officials, and I'm sure you hear this from other stakeholders, that they lead with that whole, hey, Jackie, I'm all about public safety. I'm all about public safety. Well, so am I, but not simply in a retroactive justice for the last victim way, but in that I realize 95% of these people are going to get out. I'm all about public safety also for those future victims who are going to look at me and other criminal justice practitioners and say, what did you do while my son was incarcerated? Or I should say, what did you do when the perpetrator of the crime against me was incarcerated and you had a chance to alter that person's trajectory and you didn't do it? Because you took this mantra of, I'm all about public safety, so I want this person put on Florida's PRR list or whatever it is, not realizing, yeah, but you lock them up and you pass that tipping point of why and when incarceration can be beneficial. Now you just set that person up to victimize when they get out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you look at, like, you're talking about children, like, if you think about, people don't think about the families of the incarcerated. And obviously, like you said, that doesn't excuse criminal behavior, but just a straight up punitive environment like we're in now. Like, I've got stats right here that children of incarcerated parents are 35% more likely to be charged with a felony, 25.5% more likely to drop out of high school. And I bet that seems low to me, but 14% to become a teenage parent. So the impact on the family is astronomical, and it's hard to pinpoint because they could be homeless because of it. They, dad's the breadwinner, or the struggle is so intense, and that starts from before they even maybe go to prison. It's when they can't make bail because they don't have the money to pay their bills anyway. It's a whole nother, we won't go into that whole rabbit hole, but, so the impact of the family is real. And so when we over incarcerate, like we're doing now, it just exacerbates that cycle, and, like Luke said, Mom, so many of these guys I'm in here with, they grew up going to visit their parent in prison. That's all they know. So it's just the norm. It's just like almost expected, just like people that go to college because their dad went to college. It's just your normalcy. It's just the normal way of life for them, and it's just heartbreaking because they don't have a chance. They don't have a chance from day one.
My listeners who work in or have worked in correctional facilities can relate to this. I used to work at a correctional facility, and to your point, Jackie, there is nothing more heartbreaking than going to work and you see Mom with the toddler in tow coming to visit Dad and talk to them through the thick glass and go through the metal detectors. And I can't imagine the perspective of that child and the trauma and I say this in a weird, perverse way, but like the normalcy of that situation. Like, that shouldn't be normal to bring a child into a correctional facility to visit their father.
I mean, for instance, I'll give you one other example, Joe. So another girl that I've met through all this, I've met the most amazing people through this journey. And another girl I know, her husband is in PRR, life sentence for something he did at the age of 20. They have, I think, there's multiple children, school-age children, and I don't know if they come from both of if it's a blended family or what. I'm not sure, since he's been in since he was 20. She spends $500 a month on phone calls so that he can do homework with the kids. Because she's like, I don't care if I can't eat. My kids are going to experience some normalcy of like being raised by their dad. I think we talked about the data and how the data can make a difference and start to get perk people up and start to grab their attention. It's a combination, though, of data and human stories. Like the human stories really start to make sense. Like when I tell people about Luke's sentence, every one of us could have been in the place he's in right now. Unless you've never taken a drink in your whole life and never driven after one glass of wine, which there's not many of us out there that can say that. Good for you if you haven't, but any one of us could be in that situation. And one day your life is going great, and then the next day it's changed forever. And of course, someone else's life has changed forever. I'm not ever discounting that. That there's someone that's no longer getting to live their life. So that's where the punitive part of punishment does come in, but it can't. Your punishment can't be completely based on how what I'm saying. It's hard to explain it, but it can't be complete. You can't make it better. It's not going to make it go away. It's not going to all of a sudden make the accident reverse. And so how can we use it to better society now? How can we use this horrible, situation to make the world a better place?
I love the fact that you brought up the balance of data and analytics with human stories. It's indeed one of the reasons I started this podcast, and we touched on this a bit earlier, Jackie, when you said that as a vocation, corrections does a horrible job with public relations. So that was one of my motivations for starting the podcast, was to share those success stories. And as listeners know, that's why I love sprinkling in guests who have lived experience, because it puts a story behind those statistics. And it's not just the skewed failures that we see. We were talking about the media earlier, and I can ask probation officers about this and corrections officers, and they'll all say the same thing. Yeah, when you turn on the news, they just celebrate the failures.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they do, 100%.
The person who escaped from prison, or the person that reoffended on supervision, on probation, or parole. But I've yet to see a big news story on somebody receiving an early discharge from probation because they did such a great job, or someone who started a local business after their release from prison. We just literally celebrate the failures.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when all this first started for me, I went to a Prisoners of Christ breakfast, which is a wonderful reentry organization here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I didn't know much about it. My world was upside down still at that point. Luke had just gone in to start his sentence, and 6 men were up on the stage talking about their experiences with Prisoners of Christ, which is a reentry organization. But there's only so many beds that some of these, all these little mom and pop reentry places are so valuable, but they can only hold so many people. So it's kind of like winning the lottery to get a spot in one. But these guys spoke one after the other, and like 30 years in, 25 years in, just one after the other. And I'm now a business owner. I'm married to the love of my life. I have grandkids, and just crying up there and just so emotional about their appreciation of life and yet so proud of what they've come to, and the success that they have been able to. How they're successful is beyond me, because someone had to give them a chance, because naturally our system does not make it easy for justice impacted people to get jobs, housing, any of those things. So I was sobbing the entire thing, because I was like, golly, these are just the best stories. They're so amazing. The turnaround these men have made is we should be shouting it from the mountaintops, and not one person knows anything about their story, unless you just aggressively like go hunt for it,
And when we talk about the value of resiliency, as you just noted there, Jackie, you want to talk about resiliency. It's talk about those barriers that folks overcome. There's a great British documentary out there called The Road from Crime, which is all about the process of desistance from crime. But when they interview folks with lived experience, they sort of debunk what the layperson thinks about the role of prison and incarceration. But to your point about the hurdles facing folks post-incarceration, they all said to a person, for me, the real punishment started when I got out of prison. Mm-hmm. When I couldn't get a job because of discrimination, when I couldn't find housing because of housing rules or this, that, or the other thing, or all these other barriers and obstacles that society put up.
You have extra problems because you have to pay your bills, your probation bills, before you can eat or pay your rent, or you will go back in, so that's another barrier if you have probation.
Yeah, I know when I worked for the Florida Department of Corrections, and it sounds like it's still the same, but that was one of the states that had the practice of collecting what we call cost of supervision fees. Mm-hmm. And like you said, if you didn't pay those fees, you could be locked back up again for that, which is almost akin to debtor's prison if you think about it.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is. Well, bail, that's what bail is too. If you can't post bail, but like in Florida, like right now, like we tried to pass a bill last year, a technical probation violation bill that kind of gave probation officers, rightly so, an ability to sanction certain probation violations and not go to prison for it. Go to prison for a 7-year sentence for a $35 traffic license fee or whatever is just stupid, but we have 14% of our incarcerated population are technical probation violations. They did not commit a new crime, and so again, broken yet again, and by the way, that bill passed unanimously in the House and the Senate of Florida, which are both supermajority Republican. Not one no vote got to the governor's desk, and 2 days before the session ended, he vetoed it.
Boo.
With no explanation.
Just so listeners are clear, when we talk about technical violations, and you mentioned this, but yes, it's not for committing a new offense. It's not for violating a no contact order with your victim. It's for those so-called technical conditions, such as reporting to your probation officer.
Maybe failing the drug test, which obviously to me is a little bit more severe, but there's still sanctions. The probation officer knows that person best at that point. Are they doing well? Did they just have a bad day or couldn't miss their bus? Or, there's so many little things that, it's hard enough to be out there trying to make it in their second sentence, like we talked about, but to also meet all these rules that are put on top of them as well. So it's, so all of those things together, are just make these hurdles so big. And then when they're so scared to death to violate because you're going to go back in for whatever your original charge was, you're not going to go back in for like 2 months or, and so the bill was supposed to be able to give them opportunities to add maybe more probation, another month or two of probation. There was different things depending on the severity of the violation, but just some kind of power back to the probation officer. Because right now they have none.
There's a book on my bookshelf back here called Pervasive Punishment by Fergus McNeil. And he speaks of this notion, and I can really relate to this because I work in the state of Minnesota, where on the one hand, we're super, super proud of ourselves because we have one of the nation's lowest rates of incarceration as far as sending people to prison. But, to make that happen, the flip side is we have a lot of people on supervision. It's not like we're just letting people walk and not go to prison, but in our sort of kind-heartedness, we thought, we'll put you on supervision instead. Well, Fergus wrote this book called Pervasive Punishment when he really examined this sort of net-widening practice and said, you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, because at a point, and I thought of this with the technical violations, if you put somebody on probation for 20 years, there's no way you're going to make it without a technical violation. And he puts this in context, and I'll tell folks, I've missed a dentist appointment. I've been late for parent-teacher conferences. I've had my, oh shit, I forgot about that moment. But I've never ended up in a jail cell because of that. Mm-mm. And again, if you were to tell, or I could pose this to the listeners, our pro-social listeners, you couldn't comply with 20 years probation without a technical violation. And we're pro-social people. So it's almost like setting folks up to fail. He was at least shining a light on, okay, just realize that for every action, there's a reaction. For every person you're not sending to prison, you're putting on supervision. But if you're not careful about that length of supervision, or to your point, Jackie, if you're not giving the probation officers who know those clients best the discretion to say, okay, this was a technical violation, no new crime committed, nobody was hurt, but we're going to embrace more of a harm reduction model than this binary pass-fail approach, we'll get better outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
So, Jackie, are you doing work then with your advocacy work, like, for example, at Tallahassee, at the Capitol, or maybe talk about some of the efforts and some of those deliverables that you'll be able to crank out?
Yeah, so Data for Change is a nonprofit, just formed earlier this year. I quit my job to do this full time, so I'm in it now. I'm not knee deep, I'm neck deep, but I, like once you learn this stuff, you can't unknow it, and so no matter what happens with Luke, I feel like I'll be doing this forever. I mean, I feel like this is now my life's work, and because I know we can do it smartly, I know we can get creative in ways that we've never been before with it, as compared to traditional incarceration and traditional probation. I know there's other ways that we can restore people and rehab people that's better public safety, not worse. And so I go and meet with legislators. I just really just trying to educate them on right now, everybody, just educate them on the current state, the current problems, the current state. I don't really, I don't put forth bills or anything like that. I really just advocate for based on the education I've gathered. And I love to talk at the county. So we have these county delegation meetings that are before the session starts, so that the public can just get in front of all the legislators for that county are at these meetings. And so the public can just speak. You each get like 3 minutes to speak at whatever you want to talk about. Most people, some of the nonprofits asking for money or whatever the different things are, schools and hospitals and stuff like that. But then the general public gets to speak. And so I go to, like this year, I'm going all over the state to go to, and I pick certain ones because I want to get in front of certain legislators. But what I've realized, though, is I'm speaking as much to the audience behind me as I am to the legislators in front of me. And it's a controversial topic, right? I mean, we're a conservative state. The first time I got up, my knees were shaking so bad I couldn't, I could hardly see straight, and because I think part of me was afraid that someone was going to say, "Oh, you're crazy. This is wrong." Number one, they've never done that. But number two, I've actually got, like this last one I went to where the police chief was so adamant on the lock them up. I talked to a sheriff's deputy afterwards, and he was like, "Thank you for what you said. I agree with what you're saying. I mean, obviously public safety is our primary, as it should be. But I really felt like the way that you talked about it, it made perfect sense, because it's just real life stuff, and I don't get emotional. I don't scream and yell about my son and, anything like that. It's more just like, here's the state of things. What do you think about that? And so I'm hoping to gain, more and more following of just the current state, because I think that if I can educate the non-criminal justice impacted community on the current state is a really important part of my process. But I'm also really adamant to get in front of the legislators and the people that don't agree with what I'm saying, because it doesn't help. Like I met a guy that worked for a state attorney in Florida the other day, and he's like, "Oh, you don't want to talk to me. I'm the last person you want to talk to." And I'm like, "No, you're wrong. You're exactly who I want to talk to." And I said, if I can't get in front of you and figure out what areas we can come together in, we're not going to agree on everything. We live in a beautiful country that you don't have to, but I know there's things that you and I can agree on. I absolutely know it, whether it's just programming and reentry. If you're not there for sentence reform, I'm okay with that. You don't have to agree with me, but I'll try to make you agree with me. But like, let's start with programming. Like, do you agree that we need blah, blah, blah? Oh yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay. Well, then that's part of second chances too. Because if we can do a better job when they're in there and when they get out, then the sentence reform comes a lot easier because we're building a foundation of success and we're starting to measure true recidivism, true risk. And then we can start to say, oh, well, I saw these guys that did this stuff and they're doing great out in society. Now let's look at these guys that are still in. Are they doing those same things? We'll get, likely to give them a chance. There's different ways you can take the results of one and kind of feed it back into the system. So there is a lot of appetite for reform in the programming and reentry arenas. So in the last session, lots of discussion, lots of work around those areas. Even the technical probation violation bill that, everyone voted for, there's good signs that there's appetite for change. Air conditioning. There's a lot of people fighting for air conditioning in the prisons. They understand that. They understand that it's not humane. You don't even let your dog be in in a car without air conditioning. You get arrested. So it's not humane, and they've got to figure out a resolution for that because only 25% of our dorms are air conditioned. So it was really pleasant to see, as a newbie, like my last session was my first time doing this, to see there is humanity there. There are people that are looking at these 86,000 people as humans. And that's the first step, right? They're not, like you said, it's not us versus them. It's we're us. We're all human race. God created every single one of us. And he doesn't make any mistakes. And everybody, has the opportunity to be redeemed. I mean, everybody does. I mean, you should have to show it. You should have to earn it. But the chance should be there. And so it's really starting to shift a little bit, but we're nowhere near sentence reform. And mainly because, I really am not a DeSantis basher, but he's very severe when it comes to that criminal justice topic. And so, we just know that nothing's going to get passed regarding criminal justice reform. So let's focus on the things that we do have a chance at starting to move the dial. And so that's kind of what we're doing. And just education with data is is what I can bring to the table. Plus I just love people and I can build relationships with anybody, even someone who thinks they hate me, so that to me is, it's just, again, relationships that run the world and data runs the world. And so together, those two things, we can all come together and start to collaborate and figure out what does everybody agree that is common sense change for Florida and for the nation. I know I'm optimistic about it, but I truly believe that I call myself a disruptor. I'm a disruptor of the status quo. And I did it in my regular career. Like they were resistant to change, even just regular organizational change. And I'm like, I can change them. Just give me some time, and so you have to believe in what you're talking about. You have to be able to obtain trust for the things you're saying. So I never say anything that I haven't researched. So I don't throw facts around that loosely, like this means this, no, it doesn't, so, so I'm very careful about the things that I do put forth. Most of what I present is straight from the Florida Department of Corrections. And so, cause having that level of trust with someone that you're not going to just spew things at them that are twisted to whatever makes sense for you. It's really just the fact of the matter, no pun intended. So, that's where I'm at. So yeah, I'll be in Tallahassee for all the committee meeting weeks, especially the criminal justice committees. When we're there, we can get, schedule appointments with legislators. But my real passion is just educating the non-criminal justice impacted people of the state, because without them, we can't make the change.
And I love your approach. You read my mind and sort of stole my thunder for the follow-up question, but you answered it when you were talking about bumping into the prosecutor who said to you, I'm the last person you want to talk to. And you said, no, you're the first person I want to talk to. You're right. we can only get so far preaching to the choir. I was just telling this story recently to somebody. I teach a graduate corrections course here, but a lot of the students are actually in law enforcement. They've got to take this corrections leadership program as part of their degree program. But I tell them it's one thing if I get folks in corrections or practicing probation and parole officers who've already sort of drank the Kool-Aid. But when I get the law enforcement officers in there and I'm talking about motivational interviewing or sort of unpacking what we refer to as criminogenic need or the sort of risk factors that clients have, and I can just see the light bulbs going off like, oh, wait a minute. So that kid that I'm pulling over every weekend, he's not just an a-hole. There's actually a scientific diagnosis that you could trace back why they behave that way. Kind of my earlier sentiments about, view these as survival reactions rather than just delinquent behavior. But if we can more holistically look at individuals on a systemic level and all get on the same page and tear down those walls like you're doing, Jackie, I think we're going to make progress.
Well, and it's like, again, bringing tides back into, because I really, I heard that episode and I was like, oh, I love this. And that's why I talked to your cohort and just love her too. And I don't have a need for, I just a creature of knowledge. And so I know I work with a group of recovering addict women that are just amazing. And so I felt like this was a good fit for them. And I could see it in multiple places, but especially in the prison system, because, they have to take certain programs, anger management or whatever the different programs are. Some of them are state, they have to take, and then others are by choice, but everything is, we call it check the box training.
Yep.
So they just literally go through the book with the little old granny that came in that has no life experience and check the book, do the little test. And then they get that on their history of, okay, we got through that one. And like every traumatic experience is different and everybody handles it different. And the way people react to those traumas are different. And so it's not a one way fits all approach. You're not going to fix anybody that way. You might as well not even have the class, so we need something that's more, truly can adapt to the person that you're trying to, work with.
Just, a more holistic approach. And we've been talking about the us versus they. And I'm sure if you're not already mentioning it when you speak to the layperson, but just pointing out the fact that it's not like on television where it's the good guys and the bad guys, or even the perpetrator and the victim. Most people in prison are victims at some point. There's not just this black, white. It's very, very, very gray. But if you look at it as a victim versus perpetrator, you're not going to get that. You're not going to see that, all the traumatic experiences in prison. You've got to take a much more holistic view.
They know them as their number. DCK 31479 is my son, and their last name. They don't know their first name. They don't know anything about them. They don't, understand anything. They know what they did to get in there. And that's all and so I've actually spoke at length I'm very friendly with the people at Luke's prison. That his prison is amazing and they take great care of him. And every time I go in there, I'm like, thank you for what you do. Thank you for keeping my son safe. I know this is not an easy job. So to some of their defense, they don't get trained on the things that would change that. And they actually have policies in place that don't allow them to know the people that are in there very, and so, but they do have this whole, like I was talking about air conditioning with one of them. She's like, well, some of them definitely don't deserve it. And I'm like, ooh, no, that's not true. Well, you don't even know what he's put us through. And they look at it by what they've put the correctional officer through and not like what caused them to do that in the first place. And that perhaps if you treated them a little bit better, they might treat you, it's like this vicious cycle on the playground of, well, he said it first. And so I said it back and, and so, but there's no training in place, like where in Norway's like the normalcy principle and some of the normality, if we could get to the point where they truly saw these folks as human beings and got to know them a little bit better, it would be astronomical, and it would start to change the culture just inherently, because they would start to be like, oh, this guy, like Luke's charge again, they don't look at him like, oh, you're a monster, and he's a good kid. He's very respectful and what have you. So they know he's not going to cause trouble. But they look at some of these others and they're just like, you're just nothing, and they treat him like that. And so then they know that. So then they act out back, and so it's this like constant cycle of issues between the two. And if they could just use some approach of like you said, just trying to envision them sitting next to them at a desk in second grade, that, you just went down a different path than them. They had things that happened that changed their path or whatever, it would be an astronomical culture shift.
And that practice that you just articulated, Jackie, of defining that individual on their offense. I stole this from one of my colleagues, but he talks about that phenomenon as whether it's an inmate or somebody on supervision, on probation or parole or supervised relief. But when you look at them through that narrow lens, it's akin to saying, I'm going to define you based on the worst thing you did on the worst day of your life.
Yep, exactly. And the thing is that the irony of it all is that they would love their job a lot more too, if they could come in there and have a relationship with these people and see them change and help and be part of the reason why they change. I mean, how rewarding would that be? Like you'd actually want to come to work every day. It would become a sought after job, just like in Norway, so I think that kind of stuff, they're starting to get it a little bit too. But I think they all talk about, in Norway, we want to be more like Norway. But then they just, it just doesn't come to fruition. When you have huge vacancy problems and you're chasing that, it's hard to get to the point where you're, like you can breathe and start to do some of these really good things, But I think it starts just by being able to know their name, what do you have brothers and sisters? Where did you grow up? I don't know, just any kind of like personal level of it. Yeah. So, just anything that they can, like any kind of like personal connection, to me would make them like kind of put that barrier down a little bit.
That alone would be a game changer. Yeah.
And it's just be able to kind of predict behavior before it happens. Like, there's a book I read called Happy Eyes by Ryan Tillman. It's a great book. And I tout him all the time. I just love him. And he's a law enforcement, but now he's a motivational speaker and does like trainings and stuff. But it's all about like the guy that you just put in the back of your patrol car, understanding him as a human, that like, yes, he just did a bad thing, but let's give him, like he would get through to people because he gave them the grace of getting to understanding that this is not just this is not what they're all about, and so he changed lives because he actually got to know them a little bit, or gave them an understanding, or gave them some compassion about what brought them to this horrible day and this horrible place. And it's a great book, and it's a short read. I sent it to my son to read, and he works with correctional officers too, and he works with law enforcement, and just trying to bring the community and the law enforcement community together and fix that broken system. But just generally speaking, that if you just give someone the grace of trying to understand them as a human, it just goes so far.
Jackie, I'm going to have you back on the show sooner rather than later.
I have an opinion about everything, Joe. I do. So just so you know.
You make a great guest in that regard. Let me ask you this, because I always ask my guests this. When I do have you back, and again, sooner rather than later, but let's say you're back in a year or two, just look into your crystal ball, and what do you think we might be talking about in your utopian crystal ball?
I really hope that we can transform the process when people are incarcerated, because I think that is the catalyst for all other good change. And so if we can start to make good progress of, I call it care and feeding, but care and feeding of people when they're in there, we've got them now. What are we going to do with them kind of thing? Let's make a difference and give them a chance to make it in their second sentence, just give them a fighting chance. And we don't do that today. And education is number one. education and obviously mental health, dealing with mental health issues. Addiction is people with mental health and addiction, they go in there, we just cross our fingers that they're going to come out all of a sudden magically cured, and it's never going to happen. So if we can start to crack that nut, it will make a difference on both sentence reform and reentry, I think, and to kind of bring it all together. And so, to me, that's the biggest thing. And I think that in Florida, there is an appetite for change in that arena. So I do think we can see some really good positive movement there. I would also love to see PRR be drastically redefined or brought, something done with it, because 25% life without parole population, which doesn't even impact me personally. I can hardly sleep at night thinking about that. The minute I found that statistic, I'm like, this can't even be real, So those are two things that I would love to see me be able to come back on in a year and say, look at what we've done, and we'll see. It's a lifelong thing at this point.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, your passion is real and it's authentic, and you make an amazing ambassador for change. We need more folks like you out there advocating for folks on both sides of the law and order equation.
Yep.
Jackie Dunn joining us from the great state of Florida. And I meant it, Jackie, we'll have you back on sooner rather than later. Until then, thank you so much and take care.
Thank you, Joe. You've been amazing too. And I appreciate what you guys do.
Thanks, Jackie. Bye-bye. What an extraordinary discussion we've had today with Jackie Dunn. Her journey from being a data scientist to becoming an advocate for change in the criminal justice system due to her deeply personal connection has been both enlightening and moving. We've covered critical considerations around data usage in the criminal justice system, the transformative power of personal experiences in shaping our understanding of the system, and how Jackie's nonprofit, Data for Change, is pioneering the integration of social justice elements in criminology. A heartfelt thank you to Jackie for offering us this nuanced, deeply personal perspective that so perfectly aligns with the ethos of our podcast. Understanding that behind every statistic, every policy, and every piece of data, there are real people and real families affected. And let's not forget the discussion we had around our TIDES practice model, a game-changing approach designed with trauma-informed care and desistance from crime principles in mind. For those of you interested in corrections and rehabilitation reform, this is a transformative approach you'll want to know more about. Please reach out to us for further information. We will be back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, program design, or, of course, the TIDES model of supervision. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter, now known as X. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, or Jackie Dunn on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
I'm not a soft on crime girl at all. I'm a smart on crime girl. I really do not believe in like just letting everybody out. And, again, it's not black and white, right? So I always say that those of us that are now fighting for this and advocating for criminal justice reform, we're terrible PR. We're terrible PR for ourselves because it's just not talked about.
The Criminologist podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.